So classy. And I want you to play Mozart today, because Mozart is supposed to be the music of the divine. It's God speaking through music, almost the music of the spheres. I think we've got a bit of Leonard Cohen as well, but basically Mozart today. Today is the last in a series that I've been doing on the nature of being. And if you wanted to catch up on any of the other ones, we've got this great little card at the back of the, on the table at the back. And that sort of tells you exactly how to get either the podcasts, or you can see it on YouTube, just the message on YouTube, or you can see the whole service on our website. So you can always get it from there. Or the podcast is just the sermon, just the message, so you can listen to it on your iPhone or your whatever, or other phones are available. You can look at it, listen to it on that, and just plug it in. So there are lots of ways of getting these messages if you want to. So this is the last in a series, and last week I quoted Zen Master Rujing, who said, "The entire body is a wind chime, hanging in empty space. Regardless of the wind from the east or the west or the south or the north, joining the universe, we're chiming out." That's what we're doing in our life, just chiming out. We have to have the humility to realize that we're all just hanging there, that there's nowhere to go, nothing to work out. And if we find ourselves doing anything else, we have to bring ourselves back to just expressing that wisdom that's within us. It's the universe's action on us, and it's our response to the universe. That's the true nature of our being. That's the language of God, like Mozart's music, and that's our purpose in being in the world, to allow the universe to move through us and for that wisdom to come out through us. Getting that idea, being comfortable with that as an idea, is quite a journey, getting to that point that we're just a wind chime. In fact, it's a spiritual journey, one that is guided by the heart rather than the mind. When we're guided by the heart rather than the mind, we get to that point of that realization that there's nothing to do but allow the universe to blow through us and allow the wisdom to come out of us. To arrive at that point is why we all come together here. I always say that our purpose here at the Aspen Chapel is to discover together how to live life more skillfully. The Zen master says that the ultimate is just to hang like a wind chime. But the question really is, how do we get to that point? Because, with the cut and thrust of life, of our jobs, of the school, of paying for the mortgage, of getting the groceries, of worrying about climate change, and generally keeping our head above water, there seems to be a lot more to do than just chime like a wind chime. Well, over the last 3 weeks, I've been talking about the importance of coming into that place of pure being. That's that place of pure being, where you're just there hanging in the universe blowing through us, and our wisdom coming out. I've talked about the importance of having a unique relationship with the universe that gives us what we need in order to live a fulfilled life. The fact that the toils and troubles that we face in our daily life are actually the raw material for the joy that's available to us. So all the things that come to us are given to us by the universe in order for us to be able to transform them into joy. If we own our troubles, rather than blaming others for the why me, why is it me that blah, 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 if we own our troubles rather than blaming others for the situation we find ourselves in, then we own the transformation that moving through these troubles gives us, and the joy of knowing that we're turning in our life that pain into love. But again, I think that's quite a high bar to commit to as we struggle our way through life, getting to that point where we're totally comfortable with just being and not worrying about our circumstances, not worrying about what's going on. And, that is the aspiration. If you read all the great spiritual teachers, the aspiration, the voice of God is speaking through the snow here, just reinforcing what I'm saying there. The aspiration is to just live a pure life, where you're not worried about what's going to happen in the future, where you're not concerned about things, where you're not always trying to feel better, but you're just expressing yourself. It is a high point. And just want to go through today how I think we get to that point of just being. And I think the starting point for that is to see our reality. The starting point of pure being is to see our reality in terms of consciousness. We have to begin by seeing the nature of reality in terms of consciousness. Yes, rocks are hard and water's wet. That pillar's hard. This is hard. Yes, I'll hurt myself if I fall over. I'll probably die if I get hit by a car while crossing a road. But the reality of what we experience all exists in what we call our consciousness. The combination of the rational mind, of feelings, sight, touch, smell, memories, sexuality, and the awareness that goes to make up the isness of what we call reality or life. All that isness takes place in our consciousness. It's all in what I said last week, the noosphere, the realm of consciousness, as opposed to the material realm that we spend so much time in. And yeah, the material realm is completely real. But when it comes down to it, it's all experienced in our consciousness. It's all taken in by our rational mind, and it's our consciousness that is creating the reality that's in front of us. We carry around our consciousness. And of course, our consciousness is unique to each of us. Bruce's consciousness is unique to Bruce. Dan's consciousness is completely unique to Dan. My consciousness is very different to your consciousness. Your father didn't die when he was 2. My father died when I was 2. You weren't sent away to boarding school like they do in England at the age of 9. My consciousness is very different. You haven't seen the sights that I've seen or heard the sounds that I've heard, all of which enables me to be the consciousness that I am. Your life has led you to be that consciousness that you are, and so on. And I think that's the first thing to realize, that, everything takes place within our consciousness. The second thing I think, when we, to getting to this point of, pure beingness, the second thing to realize is that consciousness in general is evolving. Consciousness is evolving. What humans were conscious of 10,000 years ago is very different to what they were conscious of 2,000 years ago. Even 100 years ago, there was no experience of what we call global consciousness. And you can see it, in all the different things that, over the thousands of years, humanity has become conscious of more and more things. Spiritually, over the years, we've gone through, and I mentioned this a few weeks ago, 2 axial ages. Axial is a pivotal point. The first axial age was between 2,500 and 2,000 years ago. And it produced Lao Tzu, the Greeks, the Romans, Jesus. And it's characterized, that first shift in consciousness, by the emergence of a shift from local issues, just what's going on with me, to the idea that there is a transcendent, that there is something that transcends all things and is common to all things. The idea of the transcendent. And the change the way the world looked at things. You know, individuals changed the way they looked at things through that change. And then we've had the second axial age, more recently, characterized by a new global consciousness and just the realization of the interconnectedness of all things. So, you know, all the way through humanity's existence, our consciousness has been transformed. Although we have our individual consciousness in general is evolving. And as it's evolved, when we're born, we take in where consciousness has got to. As we become more conscious, so we share the agreement with others as to what so. There's a general what so now that slavery is not a good idea. You know, 200, 300 years ago, there was not a what so in that. That wasn't a general agreement. And so you can see how consciousness has changed. You know, we take electricity and gravity for granted now. 500 years ago, they'd have seen things completely differently. So that's the second understanding, that consciousness, you know, is evolving. Which brings us to the third understanding that we arrive at, which is that not only is consciousness that we are aware of evolving, but in fact, all evolution is a function of consciousness. That's the third point. All evolution is a function of consciousness. Right from the Big Bang, 13.7 billion years ago, it's not been about the selfish gene, as Richard Dawkins would have it. It's been about the evolution of awareness in different forms that's led to everything that we are now. After the Big Bang, that awareness was of the reactive nature of atoms as they collided and stars and solar systems were founded. That eventually led to the awareness of single-cell organisms that have developed ways of feeling and getting an idea of what's around them. And then more complex organisms with different ways of being aware. So consciousness evolves eventually to humanity, where we are able to self-reflect. And for the first time, the universe becomes aware of itself. You know, up to now it was just little atoms, they didn't know what they were doing, blah, 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 and suddenly, boom, we can become aware of ourselves. We are collectively the universe made conscious of itself. Within you, so I'm told, are carbon atoms that were around at the time of the Big Bang. And those atoms have now found ways of being able to play tennis, to watch Succession on television, to feed a family, and to be aware of the existence of the very unfolding of evolution of which they're playing a part. So the first three steps are that we are aspiring to. Our reality is our consciousness. Our consciousness is collectively evolving. And thirdly, all the evolution of creation is a function of the evolution of consciousness. When those fish wanted to get out the sea, they became aware of the light and they crawled out of the sea because of their awareness of consciousness. All of evolution is a function of the evolution of consciousness, and we are the end point of that evolution. Which brings us to the fourth point, which I think is the greatest leap. And remember, as I said last week, I am offering all this with the willingness to be wrong. So I could be all wrong about all this. This is just my perspective. How could it be anything else? The fourth part says that not only is consciousness evolving, and we are the end point of that, but that we are not all separate bits of that consciousness. But consciousness is all a part of one united whole. And like the waves are in the ocean, yet they're part of the ocean. We are all part individually of an ocean of consciousness that is alive. It is an alive and integrated whole. Our minds will have us see that we're separate. We see ourselves as separate. Even if we do breathe the same air and walk on the same earth, the mind thinks that we're separate, apart from each other, individuated and alone. And we all feel that aloneness. Even if we have husbands or wives or mothers or fathers, in the end, it's just us on our own, up here, trying to make the best of things. We feel that aloneness, which is why the general agreement around in the world is that we're all separate and we just get on with it. And, people club together and say, I'm going to be separate with you because I believe this. And I'm going to be separate with you because I believe that. Point 4 says that this is not the case. It says, point 4, that we are all united in a oneness that transcends our bodies. The space between us. It transcends our bodies. It transcends the space between us. And it transcends all other aspects of existence. Now, this is the biggest leap, in my view, because actually you can see that that we are our consciousness. The first point, we can see that. We just know intrinsically, okay, I can see that, in reality, my reality is my consciousness. I can see that. And you can also see that consciousness evolves. It's demonstrable that consciousness does evolve. And there is a logic to the idea that consciousness is the driver of evolution. You can see how that could work. And, we can see that in action. However, all our experience tells us that we are separate from each other. All our senses give us that reality, as does our rational mind and the agreement of the world. But I would like to suggest that the awareness of the world, the cosmos, as a reality entire, as one thing, that awareness is the next step in evolution. The awareness of all being of a oneness, the awareness of the world, the cosmos, of being one entity, is the next step of the evolution of consciousness. And the reason we have for considering it, the reason we should consider it, is not just because of the science of quarks or quantum mechanics, which does point to general relativity. But it's the experience of those who've gone before, who've realized that level of consciousness in their own lives. They've experienced it within their consciousness, and they've come back to tell us. It's their stories that inspire us about the ideas of what we call enlightenment, or a wider consciousness that makes sense of it. The consciousness of the Buddha, or the consciousness of, and you can read, there are many books that you can look at and read that do talk about this whole idea of it being one consciousness. And in fact, that's why I'm here today. My spiritual journey has taken me to that experience. And, when I had that experience, I then decided that, if that was the case, if there was a completely united reality, and that Tracy and I are not separate, but actually we are an expression of the same DNA, then I felt it was really my duty to talk about it. Now, my journey to that understanding, came from, I did the old traditional trip. I went to India. I sort of trekked in the Himalayas, had a big experience in the Himalayas, and thought, it's all about, actually the experience I had in the Himalayas was quite good. We were up 14,000 feet. And when you're up that high, you probably can see it in the Rockies, I should imagine. When you're up that high, the cloud is like a sea beneath you. And the peaks come through like great icebergs through the cloud, and you're up there with the moon. And I was like, wow! I mean, it was a big experience. And I got back, and I didn't think I'd changed much. But my mother, who's probably watching at the moment, did tell me that she knew something was up when I came off the plane wearing Indian clothes and claiming to be vegetarian. She said that was definitely. And I took on the spiritual whatever it was, and I thought, well, this is for me. So I tried to find a spiritual girlfriend. I went down, to my friend who I knew was into this sort of thing because I'd bought his stereo when he went and visited his guru in India, and I went and said, what's it all about? And he said to me, well, you are in everything, and everything is in you. I said, well, thanks very much. It's a great help. Anyway, so he gave me a book, Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, and I read that, and that really sort of convinced me that there was something else going on. And then, I really sort of wanted to have that experience. And the amazing thing was that, I don't know how it happened, but for some reason or other, I did have that experience eventually. And it was a very, I'll just give you a little bit of an idea of what it was like. I was just sitting in a room with a group of friends. And one of my friends said to me, do you play the guitar? I said I didn't. And he said, why don't you try and play the guitar to this music? So I picked up the guitar and I started playing it. And I think it was because my whole attention was on one side of, my acoustic and stuff like that. But suddenly, as I was playing it, my reality changed. And rather than just seeing myself, and at the moment I've got Mimi and Ward out there, we're separate and all that, suddenly my reality changed, and I suddenly felt something hugely bigger than myself that was coming through me and, connecting with everything else that was out there. It was if I've got these. Listen, I even brought myself a little example. Have you come across these are optical fibers? Can you see these optical fibers? And it was as if there was something that was coming through me, like optical fibers, and everything was tiny little bits of light that included me and made up everything else. And I felt completely connected. And it was most enormous wow that I saw at that particular point. I was just, I suddenly felt that there was something bigger than myself. I was a part of it. It connected with everything else, and it was a huge experience. And it lasted about 3 hours. And then it sort of went away after that. And, I haven't had the experience again, but it totally changed the direction of my life. And I suddenly had that experience where I realized that there was a fundamental interconnectedness of all things. And, in the end, it was an amazing experience to have. I haven't had the experience again, but every day I see echoes of it in the way that the world works, in the beauty that's around me, in the way that human beings can treat each other, in the violence that comes from not understanding our true nature and what that means, and in the way that life itself, works itself out. And listen, I've got a few, and again, I'm not very good at drawing here, but I'm just going to, this is my perspective as to what this interconnect, and this is point 4. This is my perspective of what this interconnectedness is about. This is your consciousness here, okay? This is what you see. This is like all this sort of stuff. And this is your unconscious here. This is memories, dreams, and reflections, everything that goes on here. And I'm suggesting that there is in the ability to access a spiritual DNA, is something that exists that gives us all life. And that spiritual DNA is what gives pillars life, it's what gives plants life. It's the same growing spiritual DNA that exists behind all things, that I have that spiritual DNA within me, and so does Tracy. And although Tracy is expressing herself as Tracy, and I'm expressing myself as me, we share that. And you can see that in this little way of doing it. So each of us has within ourselves that consciousness. We have our unconscious, and we then look and have these are individual people. And then we have our ordinary conscious. But what people call the Enlightenment experience is accessing that deep consciousness that is the spiritual DNA that is behind everything that does exist. And, what I'm suggesting here is that, that understanding of that spiritual connectedness is that fourth point that enables us to purely be, if we decide, and not every people have that experience, don't go down the route of saying, right, I'm going to commit myself to this. They say, well, I've had that experience and I'm just going to get on with it and make all the money I want to and do. You don't have to go down a spiritual path to have that experience. But if you do decide that this is important, that is what leads us to what I was showing you a couple of weeks ago in terms of meditation. And that's the link between what I was talking about a few weeks ago and this. In that meditation, your breath, you breathe in the outer, into the inner, and then you breathe out again into the outer again. And so, in a sense, what you're doing is you're breathing in and breathing out, and in following that breath and in following your heart rather than your mind, you open up that space within yourself that enables that consciousness to come through. It is an engine for creating, meditation in this way is an engine for creating an awareness of that consciousness. That's the whole point of it. Now, it's interesting, it seems to me obvious that when we breathe in, we're breathing the universe in into ourselves, and we're breathing out. We do therefore create that portal between the inner and the outer world. And the pure beingness here is just allowing that to flow through and to flow out into the universe and to have it come about. So that is the basic idea of that fourth thing. And, the interesting thing is that if we're all cut from the same block, if we are all of the same reality, there is fundamentally nothing to be afraid of. And all fear is based on the illusion of separation. Fear is based on the illusion of separation. That's not to say that we shouldn't fear the madman that's coming towards us with a knife. We should. It just says that the reason that the madman is coming towards us because you have something that he wants, or whatever he might be, and that is based on an illusion. The fact is that if we all come from the same consciousness, if we all fundamentally different aspects of the same divinity, if we all share the infinite resources of that supreme being, then the interesting thing about it is there is enough for everyone. Because that is the nature of the reality. The idea that we should try and protect our resources for our family, our community, our company, is just an illusion that there is not enough to go around and therefore we have to fight for it. It's as if there are 1,000 pieces of chocolate in a bowl and 100 children and there's not enough to go around, they think. There is enough to go around, but they fear not getting any, so the children fight for the chocolate, leaving some of the 50 pieces, some with 50 pieces and some with none at all. And that's the history of the world. The fight for chocolate is the history of the world. You can sum it up in that. And I've done that experiment here with children. I did develop this thing for kids. And I had all these children. I had about 40 children. And we put 100 pieces of chocolate. And I let the first 5 in. And they took 90% of the chocolate. And by the last lot came in, there's no chocolate left at all. So I forced them to share it. Now, I'm not saying that we should give everything away and start again. This is not some communist manifesto. I am saying that fundamentally we all share a commonwealth. And that commonwealth is the divine consciousness that gives us everything. And it gives us our current consciousness. It gives us our capacity to have consciousness. It gave us our lives. It brought us into being. And the purpose it gave us in our lives was to become conscious itself, to become conscious of the process. Everything that's happened to you in your life points towards you uncovering this truth for yourself. Everything that happens is pointing towards that. Every desire you have ever had is founded upon a desire to realize that you are in everything and everything is in you. Everything in our lives point towards the primacy of love, the need, even the need to excel and to create, the need to amass wealth, it's all motivated by this fundamental consciousness that is demanding to be experienced. We might be misunderstanding the cry within us and instead interpret it as being a need to control others. But behind it is the simple realization and truth of this interconnectedness. So if this is the case, then you can see if we are all of a one, you can see why each of us has a unique relationship to the universe, because we're connected with it in a unique way. And though it looks like we're being asked to deal with problems and pain that's unfair, in fact, it is our connection through that divine nature to all things that's bringing us these issues to deal with on behalf of all consciousness. What we do in our lives is our contribution to the evolution of consciousness, and we do it on behalf of all consciousness. Hence the idea of being donor cards. Hence the idea of getting out of our minds into our hearts. Hence the idea of meditation as a way of realizing this reality. Hence, the entire body is a wind chime hanging in empty space, regardless of the wind from the east, west, south, or north, joining the universe in chiming out wisdom. We're held by that one unified reality, and there's nothing to do but chime out the wisdom that comes to us. Now, this is most definitely not the way of the world, the way of the mind. It is the way of the narrow gate. It is the way of the heart. It is the purpose of the spiritual journey, and ultimately it is the purpose of your life and all life. We let that divine nature blow through us, aware that there's no outcome that we have to get to, no right way of being, no need for fame and gain. We're just asked to be. That's our contribution to the great wonder that we call the universe.